As Tim mentioned, my name is Paul Lichon. I'm the founder of Verso Ministries, and we work with parishes, schools, dioceses to take groups of pilgrims on pilgrimage, because we believe that this encounter with Christ can really transform the hearts and minds of those that travel.
I'm Joshua Schaffner, President of Verso Ministries, and I just want to give a caveat as we start here that we know that not every parish, not every family budget can afford taking an overseas pilgrimage, and that's why we want to kind of broaden the idea of what we mean when we say pilgrimage today, be it something domestic, something local, or even something you can do in your daily life. But first, let's start with a picture.
So when you imagine a pilgrimage group, this is probably a group that you would imagine, right? A middle to upper class, empty nesters, maybe retired folks, people with really probably the means to travel and the time to travel. And in some ways, I think this can kind of be preaching to the choir a little bit. You know, you kind of can know and expect what type of person might want to go on a pilgrimage. And really, the whole focus of our presentation today is really to expand that audience for pilgrimage. And we want to share that this can really be a great opportunity to reach our youth and young adults. In our talk today, we want to posit this as one solution. It's not the solution to solving the many problems that we've talked about the last couple days. But this is one tool you can kind of add to your ministry toolbox. And it shouldn't be just reserved for those that can do it or those ages that have the time and money to do it. But it can be expanded in many ways to reach youth and young adults in particular. And we found it's a tool for discernment, for evangelization, and for formation with young people. And to build off what many of the speakers have talked about, and Father Patty so beautifully described yesterday, we believe that the experience of physical pilgrimage, a pilgrimage which is bodily, corporate, it's done communally, yes, yet also has personal implications. It's an incarnational action, a sacramental experience. So it's a tool which can have tremendous impact on the life of a young person.
So why does pilgrimage with youth and young adults matter? Well, we all know the stats. We've heard them throughout these last 3 days, but one more I want to share. In the various reasons that former Catholics give for leaving the church, 71% say that they just gradually drifted away. And that's sad to me. That's like a rudderless ship. It speaks to the loneliness and isolation that our young people can feel at times. It reminds me that maybe they stopped coming to church and there was no one in the pews that was asking, well, where's Josh today? We must capitalize on these pivotal moments in a young adult's life when they're questioning, when they're seeking, when they're transitioning, when they're broadening their worldview and thinking about their future. And we can also capitalize on the potential that a journey or traveling has to affect our lives. One really great way that the Catholic Church continues to do that is through World Youth Days.
So I had the blessing to travel the World Youth Day to Krakow a couple of years ago. Actually, Beth and I were there together with our students. And for me personally, it was a great moment. I had been in my job for about 5 years. I was discerning what was next. And my pilgrimage intention, we always ask our pilgrims to bring an intention with them, was really, what was next for me in my life? And I had this idea of starting a pilgrimage company for a little while. It was on my heart, but I had many fears about it. I was fearful of, what if I fail? What if I lose a lot of money? I never took a business class in my entire life. And many people had addressed those fears before going into the experience. But while I was at World Youth Day, through a speech that Pope Francis offered, he simply resounded John Paul's words of, do not be afraid. And that in our lifetime of following Jesus, if we fail, Jesus is the one there to pick us up and to lead us to the next place. And really that offered that last kind of push out the door for me. And I think the real reason why it hit on that trip was because I wasn't in my normal space. I wasn't in the normal day-to-day life. I was kind of displaced, and my heart was attuned to the way the Spirit was maybe moving in this experience that I wouldn't have had back home.
But World Youth Day only happens every 3 years, and to be honest, it appeals to a very specific type of pilgrim. I'm not one of those that has ever been called to World Youth Day. Maybe one day I will. But they're only every 3 years. So what are we going to do in the time between?
So we also wanted to offer just a brief theology of pilgrimage, a glimpse into why and how a pilgrimage can be so effective in working with young people. And first and foremost, the practice of pilgrimage is a sacramental devotion. It's grounded in a sacramental worldview, a view that believes that God's presence is alive and active in this world. We know that our God is an incarnational God and that our world is incarnate with the Holy Spirit. And so the experience of pilgrimage can be thought of as a formation in the sacramental life, both the capital S sacramental and the lowercase s sacramental, which I'll speak to in a moment. But really, it starts with our baptism. It can be understood as that first invitation from Jesus to come, follow me.
And he calls us to many places for many different reasons. And in each pilgrimage site, the Spirit manifests itself in a different way. In the Holy Land, you're in the place where the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. I came to know what that meant in a very special way for a friend of mine. He was Muslim, and he was going through RCIA. And he knew the implications of that was that his entire former life would be gone. He would be disowned by his family. He would not be welcome at community events. He was jumping mind, body, heart, and soul all into the Catholic Church and his new community at our parish. And in the Holy Land, we were in Nativity. And I saw him kneel down and touch the star in Bethlehem, the place where the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And as he rose up with tears in his eyes, I'll never forget the burning fire in his heart that he had for the Eucharist from that moment on. Not that it wasn't real to him before. He made quite the jump to come into the church, but to be in the place where it actually happened, where Jesus lived, it has changed his life for the better. In other places like Lourdes, people are called for a spirit of healing. In Rome, you get to go back 2,000 years to the very bricks that laid the foundations for our Catholic Church today. In Indiana, you can go see St. Mother Theodore Guerin just down the road, one of our very own American saints that we can own, and that makes it real for people. Or even in Hawaii, the humility of Damien of Molokai to go and live and minister among lepers. God invites us to know about his nature in a deeper and more intimate way through the workings and virtue of the Spirit in these various places. And the physical journey we make mirrors that spiritual journey we make. We are pilgrims on a journey home, homeward to heaven. This pilgrimage experience, as John Paul said, is sacramental.
So we wanted to offer 4 fruits of pilgrimage, which is certainly not an exhaustive list, but 4 benefits or fruits of an experience of pilgrimage, especially for our young people. Again, so number 1, tool for discernment, evangelization, and formation. Number 2, indelible mark. Number 3, that it cultivates a participation in the sacramental life. And 4, that it promotes a culture of encounter that Pope Francis so often talks about. So the first, a tool for discernment, evangelization, and formation. I think one unique feature of pilgrimage is that it levels the playing field. And what do I mean by that? Well, I think pilgrimage has this universal appeal. And it's an experience of displacement and also of community, or rather a shared experience of displacement typically done in the community. But it helps to break down barriers between individuals and build community around a shared experience of Christ. And again, so I say it kind of levels the playing field because I've seen how attractive it can be to many different types of people. I think so often in our other ministries, we're used to seeing, okay, I've got the Bible study kids over here, and I've got the social justice kids over here, and I've got the liturgy kids over here. And in what spaces do they all kind of come together? And that might be a little bit of a oversimplification, but really I've seen in our experience that a pilgrimage can attract all of those people to it because of this universal appeal. And the beauty of it is that a pilgrimage, because it's an encounter with Christ, is that it can speak to each one of those pilgrims in a different way. So while in our typical ministries, if a kid comes to a Bible study, but they're not just ready for it maybe yet, or doesn't really associate with those kids and feels out of place there, then maybe that program or ministry might not have the same effect. And so I think in a pilgrimage, because it's a shared new experience for everybody, then it kind of levels that playing field and the Spirit can kind of work individually with all of those people while also communally taking them together.
And it doesn't just appeal to people of different types, but it also appeals to them for different reasons. And it's important to note that. It can appeal to people who are travelers that just like to get out and go, people who are seeking healing or forgiveness, someone who has a devotion to a particular saint or location, someone who wants to spend more face time with their priest, people who are already highly engaged in their faith, and people who weren't even seeking to go at all. And a great story I have of this is my pastor, Father Rick Nagel. When he was a young man before he was a priest, he was working in a school, and the youth minister of his parish asked him to lead a group to World Youth Day Denver. And Father Rick said, I don't have anything to do with youth ministry. I'm not really even practicing my faith. But they kind of strong-armed him into it, and he went. He's a very agreeable and helpful man. And when he was there, he heard those words that John Paul said earlier that came from St. John Paul, do not be afraid. And in those moments he spent with those youth at World Youth Day, he felt the call to be a priest. And he credits that as one of the main moments that led him to the priesthood. And, next slide. After we see, we must come back with a story to share and tell, an indelible mark. John Paul said the sacramental journey begins at baptism, and I put this in quotation marks because it's not the same way that a sacrament, but it is indelible. Indelible is not just something that is on our soul, but it's also defined as a memory we will never forget. And if you've been, you know what I mean. These are things that they will never forget, and that's why it's important that we pursue these pilgrimages with youth and young adults. How important will it be for them to come back with a changed life, an indelible mark, an experience that they will have to grow upon, memories to share. And in their daily lives, whether intentionally or unintentionally, they will become a witness to their faith. I've seen this in a real way with my own son. At 3 years old, we took him on his first pilgrimage. It wasn't that far. It was just out to St. Mary of the Woods. We went there with our parish, and he came along in tow. He was the delight of the bus ride, but he remembers playing with Joe McGuire on the bus. He remembers the receptionist at the parish that lifted him up to get a drink from the water fountain. But perhaps more importantly, he remembers being at the tomb of our great saint and how that impacted him 2 years later when we buried my father. He also remembers St. Theodore Guerin and the stories of her life and how the saints are our friends. And now he collects little tiny keychains with saints' pictures and talks about the saints as though he knows them personally.
So this idea of how does a pilgrimage cultivate the daily routine of living a sacramental life? I think this distinction is important. The idea that pilgrimage is a tool of formation in both the capital S, sacramental life of the church, and the lowercase s, sacramental life. Capital S sacraments, because our journey through the sacraments in many ways resembles a pilgrimage. It's our church's way to mark the steps on the journey to heaven. And the active participation, regular participation in the sacraments provide a pathway, so to speak, of following the pilgrimage of life itself. On an actual pilgrimage, I think participation in the sacraments during a pilgrimage, like receiving the Eucharist or reconciliation, for some might be the first time in a long time they receive a sacrament. At times, the reception of sacraments on a pilgrimage might help to normalize the reception of sacraments for somebody that might be drifting or away from the church. And so it helps, again, to make the experience of the sacramental life of the church, participating in things like going to Mass or regular confession, makes it less of a foreign idea. And because the whole group is doing it, and it's just a part of the journey itself, again, it can help to normalize that idea that we should regularly be participating in the sacraments. At the same time, I think it's important to notice this distinction for the sacramental life with the lowercase s. So it helps to form within a pilgrim the understanding that God is not separate from or apart from this world, but that God is an active, proactive, and intimate part of this world. So if you ask young people today, what is your image of God? I think you would get many different responses. Even in this room today, or even adults, I think many people, if you envision God, many of us envision God in kind of the cartoonish ways we've maybe seen him portrayed in the media, or just even in our own catechetical materials, but a God that might be the God in the clouds, or the grandpa, or the friend, right? It's kind of these cartoonish images of God which in some ways don't speak to the fullness of who God is. And so a pilgrimage, by helping to lead the pilgrim to an encounter with Christ can help to shape their understanding of the nature of God, right? So when you travel to the Holy Land, you understand the humanity of Jesus Christ. When you go to Lourdes, you understand the healing power of the Holy Spirit. When you go to Hawaii and learn about St. Damien, you learn about the humility of God, right? So all of these different aspects help to break down who God is and the nature of and how we envision the nature of God. All right, next slide. And then finally, it promotes a culture of encounter. So often Pope Francis speaks about this need for a culture of encounter, the need for people to truly listen, to be attentive to, and to be present to one another. And in many ways, a pilgrimage can be a vehicle for true, authentic encounter. Now, to be honest, I've seen many ways in which a pilgrim does not do this. Take, for example, a group who travels to Italy but doesn't go to Mass in Italian, or doesn't interact with the local church in any way, shape, or form. There's a way to travel within this safe, protected bubble, right? You want to kind of keep to yourself, and you kind of travel at arm's length from a true encounter with the place. But the real pilgrim takes time and space and prioritizes this authentic encounter of the people, the culture, the history, the totality of the place that they visit. They don't travel to conquer, they travel to learn. They don't travel to consume, they travel to be transformed. To be transformed by an authentic encounter with Christ in a particular place at a particular time, a place and time that is unique because of its culture and its history and its people.
So the common question we always hear, is it safe? Well, yes and no. And let me open that up for you a little bit. The first time I went to the Holy Land, we traveled at arm's length, as John Paul said. We stayed in safe places and avoided the unsafe places. Even our guide was Jewish. We went to more cultural sites and kind of steered away from some of the religious sites that might have been in questionable areas. But I can tell you unequivocally the Holy Land is safe. Traveling abroad is safe. Traveling as a group is safe. My second time to the Holy Land, because we knew what we didn't want from the first trip, we organized the second trip with a little more intentionality. Dive into the culture, meet the people, see them where they're at, while still going to the holiest sites. My flight was delayed, and I missed traveling with the group. So there I was, coming from Indianapolis alone. So I was a day late, so I was having to play catch-up. And when I got there, I had to arrange for a car to take me to meet up with the group. And I get out of the airport terminal, and there on the curb, holding my sign with my name Schaffner on it, was a Palestinian. And because I had no contact with them prior, my first reaction was a half step back. And then I thought about what we were really here to do on this pilgrimage. And I started taking steps forward and got in the car with him. And it was about a 90-minute drive for him to drop me off where I needed to go. And during that time, I learned about his family. I learned about his hopes and aspirations, how he grew up and where, what his life was like, that he was Christian. I had forgotten that all the Christians were Palestinians. I learned what it was like for him to live in community with Muslims, what it was like for him to have to cross over the border every day to get back and forth from work. He shared his lunch with me that his wife packed for him that day because he knew there were no good restaurants the route we were taking. And at the end, I got out of his car and I knew the person. I knew his story. And it helped shape my story and for me to understand more about this God that I was seeking on pilgrimage. So pilgrimage is safe, yes. But in that same breath, no, it's not. Spiritually, a pilgrimage will do things to you you're not expecting. It will stir the deep waters and bring things to the surface that you had no idea were going to come about. Some things might not be comfortable for you. But these grace-filled moments on the journey will leave lasting memories that will bear fruit in our lives. Now, let us be clear, it is not us, it's not the details of the pilgrimage that is making the difference in people's lives. Pilgrimage, at its essence, is an intimate encounter with Jesus Christ. And it is Jesus Christ who teaches, inspires, and calls us to greater holiness. Every journey, whether it's an international pilgrimage, a local one, or just the daily life, if you take up a pilgrim spirit, every journey involves risk. Risk is exciting. It dares us. It challenges us. It drives adrenaline. It makes us feel alive. It reminds us that we're human. And ask yourself, what does Jesus want to show you on this pilgrimage of life? He stands before you with hand outstretched, inviting you to come and see. Thank you.